One of the rewards of finally making headway is that one doesn't have to try so hard anymore. And I feel like I'm in holiday mode, not least because today is actually a day off for me. I don't need to work today, so why not make a video? I no longer have the urgency to make them as a kind of historical record or a personal record. Uh, but the insights are becoming clearer, and therefore, in a sense, it's a shame not to make another one. Excuse me. I do these trunk strengthening exercises, kind of like planking, and I'm out of practice, so it's a little bit stiff around my neck. I need to do a lot more of that. And I've taken to doing skipping. I like skipping. I can do it fairly well. Getting better and better. I find that when I do skipping, I can I develop the lower shin muscle, and sort of just around my ankle it gets a bit springier. And when I go down the steps at the beach, I can feel I'm a bit springier in step. That feels all right to me. So I've taken up skipping and kind of this planking and kind of your general sit-ups and push-ups and whatnot. But I'm not doing enough of them. Need to do more. That's my life in review. But on the deeper level, my emotional life in review, it's another story. Mostly it's a story of just how different I was and am still from the contemporary Westerner, and how that even that just by itself, not to mention the other problems added on, created a significant communication issue, significant difficulty for me, to the point that I became afraid to say anything eventually, because of these implicit differences, these in fact differences in use of emotional nuance, and fundamentally the differences that came from my character structure, which I now understand better than I had before, because as we all do, we tend to assume that others are like us, that they have the same structure of character, structure even of personality that we do. And in the end, it may not be the case whatsoever. And that's why I said history has a huge effect on us. The way that we are brought up, our early social conditioning, our later social conditioning, the context in which we were brought up. Mine being a context of great severity, because of course it was a wartime situation. And I think I keep mentioning that to remind myself as much as anybody, because sometimes I really do not grasp at all the degree of self-discipline that I internalized and imposed on myself for fear of something grave happening, or at very least out of fear of being heavily disciplined and reprimanded and shamed. So it's important not to forget the historical context, and yet today there's nothing more common than to deny historical context and pretend or make out that it's all just down to individual choice and what we want to do. And I guess that for some people it does feel that way, it does seem that way, but first they have to be brought up entirely within modernity, and then they will feel that way. If you're not, then you're not, and you don't have that degree of freedom within yourself. which I didn't have. So I'm thinking back and thinking about how, even as a toddler, I guess, I learned to hold back my emotion, not to express it, because my father had these amazing rages. I remember going to Beira, which is a beach in Mozambique, and I remember very clearly suddenly he and my mother had a fight. I was at an age where I could still be picked up and carried, although I believe I could also walk. And my father, I think it was a kind of threat like, I'm leaving you, I'm divorcing you, you disgust me, something to that effect. It was very, very negative, and my mother picked me up and said, well, you're harming Jenny, and it's my name, Jennifer, Jenny, you're harming her, and I'm going to take her away, and you can't touch her anymore. And it was like, I remember it, I remember thinking, I'm in danger, but I don't know why. I've done something, but I don't know what. My father is going to probably kill me, but I can't understand it. And my mother, very much in that mood of, mode of extreme defensiveness, took me away, picked me up, and took me away. And that was when I could barely walk. So I think emotional repression probably started for me around there and around then. Just don't express your emotion, because then you won't get hit or killed. And then, when I became a teenager, that was also another very negative milestone with regard to how my father and even my mother began to treat me around the time. I think they anticipated teenage rebellion, but I was too repressed and oblivious to entertain them in that manner. But nonetheless, I think they labeled me as a rebellious teenager, because that was, as I say, what was expected. And if you look at the past couple of videos, then you might begin to get an inkling of the fact that it's not what I actually did, but what I was expected to do that counted and was deemed to be real or true, because the person or the personality is not really considered all that real, at least not in my parents' worldview. It's the anticipation of convention, and in a way the demand for convention and the expectation of it, to the denial of anything that happens to fall outside of it. So I think, around that age of being a teenager, which of course was also a time of extreme political crisis, because it's when Rhodesia fell, then I turned into my teenage years. My father began to chase me around, accusing me of impertinence, which I wasn't capable of, because my emotions were too deeply repressed for that. But it was something in his head, and my mother said like I was hiding away, because I did actually one time, maybe twice, go down to the horses' stables and just lie on the hay and think about the world, and that taking that time out was considered very, very dangerous from my mother's point of view, that somehow I was curling up in a fetal position, she said, or disappearing from the world, or making a threatening gesture. I was just taking just a very little amount of time out, no more than an hour or two, but her perspective was entirely different. So they invented the false narrative, I believe, from that time on, and being adults and myself being a child, I'm sure they impressed on everybody that the false narrative was the true one, that I had somehow engaged in some teenage rebellion that I was actually incapable of. And even after we migrated, I suspect that story perpetuated. It was never based in anything actual, because once again my emotions were so repressed. I didn't have the ability or the knowledge or the awareness that in real fact I ought to have engaged around that time in some teenage rebellion. it would have been healthy for me to do, but I didn't. In fact, I didn't. I missed that opportunity. And I think that's why I came down with chronic fatigue syndrome, because I repressed and buried all my negative and hostile emotions and just swallowed them down myself. And it created havoc in my physiological system, and it created an immune issue because I couldn't resist any flu or any virus. But I think that was all to do with I didn't go through that stage of teenage rebellion when I ought to have. I ought to have digested, processed those negative emotions and separated very much from my parents and realized the faults that they had around that time. But I didn't. I couldn't. I didn't have enough emotional energy within me. I didn't have the sense that that this kind of oppressive or authoritarian nature of my parents was going to become the problem that it later did. Because I also had the recourse of the wilderness, I just went out into the wild and just enjoyed it. I didn't feel that my dilemmas and problems were relational or human. So that was the other aspect too. And now I can see it. I can see it better. My parents, they married, they were very immature, 20 and I think 20 and 22, very, very immature. And therein lies a problem. I wouldn't have considered bringing up somebody until, I'm now 48. Now I think, no, probably mature enough. Definitely not back then. But the odd things, the weird things, the misinterpretations, and in a sense, the predetermined political malice to treat me badly no matter what. That I can understand a bit better, at least from the psychological perspective, because nobody expects that a person would have their emotions buried so deeply that they didn't know what they were. Nobody understands really the extreme nature of the circumstances that would cause somebody from an early age to have done that. And so I remember when I left school, which I found kind of deadening and pointless anyway, I wanted, I was actually looking for a bit of rebellion around that time. Didn't find it. There's sort of like everybody was a wilting lily in the advanced West. No vigor, no energy. Well, just like me, really. Because that's what had become of me. After I left the African environment, I lost the vitalization of being part of a peer group and close to the wilderness, and lost those very, very fundamental energizing aspects. But later, after a couple of years in the advanced West, and when I went to university to study at that time fine arts, I was sort of stuck in this mode of confusion, and I reverted to Christian dogma to try to give myself some stability or some hope, as if it would help me to know something, which it didn't. Absolutely, it did not orient me, did not give me anything. It just made me more the victim of perfection and principles of idealism. But around that time, I remember, a lecturer saying to me, and when we said this, we spoke about the environment, something, blah, something that we planned to do. I could see, and he pointed at me, I could see the shades come down over your eyes. And I was thinking, I don't know actually what that means, that some shade was coming over my eyes, and somehow I engaged with you and then I disengaged with you, or something occurred, because so far as I was concerned, there had never been an emotional interaction. There'd been no communication. I hadn't understood anything of what was implied there, except it seemed vaguely hostile. And that was basically my experience in that fine art course until I dropped out of it, because the people are vaguely hostile. They imply things, but I don't actually know what they're implying. I can't get it. I can't get at it. It seems kind of negative. It seems like I'm an outsider and they're trying to show me that, but I don't understand what it really means. So the difficulty of understanding emotional language, that was my fundamental difficulty. And then, so later on, I could understand intellectual language. I educated myself that way, but then it was back into the workplace, and once again I was foiled because I obviously didn't understand emotional language, and people were saying things to me, and I didn't understand they were implying things. I had to be spoken to much more directly to understand them. Like, we expect you to do this or that, and rather than a hint, and if you don't do it, we're going to punish you or act as if you knew that you were doing something against what we had implicitly wished. I don't know. But I had no ability to know it, and then later I got beaten up severely, and the consequences of being constantly reprimanded all the time for reasons unknown, that took a great toll on my health. But still, I didn't know that we had had an emotional interaction of any sort, since I didn't feel like I had been engaged emotionally in any interaction. Then later, when I tried to understand things better, for example, I went to a psychological counselor, and I would say something like, well, this person said this thing to me, and what does it mean? And the misunderstanding would build up all over again, because the counselor would think that I was agitated, that somebody had insulted me, and I'd remembered it, and that I was kind of holding it to my heart as a kind of obsession that someone had said something hurtful, which was not at all the case. Actually, I was asking in a very direct sense, what does it mean? When they said that, did it mean something or didn't it mean something? I actually don't know what it meant in a very literal sense. Could you tell me? So I wasn't harboring a grudge. I wasn't being narcissistic. I wasn't remembering things from 10 years ago or 5 or 3. I was saying, I remember another strange incident that I can't process. I don't understand. I'm not from your culture. So you are from your culture. Tell me what this meant. That's all I was doing. And goodness me, the amount of hostility that engendered, because people thought, if she remembers something from that far back, she's narcissistic. Goodness me. And all I was doing was asking the question. So this is the problem with the issue. Well, it's a problem when somebody's emotions are deeply, deeply repressed and everyone treats them with hostility rather than understanding. It means the adjustment time and the understanding time is just going to take all that more longer and be much more painful, because well, that's how it is when nobody shows you the ropes or tells you what's going on or what it all means or anything, or gives you the slightest benefit of the doubt, which would have been nice too, on occasion. And that's how it all is for me looking back now. Looking back at the real betrayals, looking back at the lack of knowledge that I encountered, lack of knowledge in psychology, in history, in politics. you know, and I could continue my critique, but I'm sure you get my gist. And believe me, this is not, I don't have a vendetta. Um, Maybe I'm too old for that, who knows? Maybe I've lost my youthful passion by now, missed the boat again. Uh, but I do have awareness of the shortcomings of things and people, including myself. Uh, you know, looking back,